Why would a little girl with everything stop for someone the whole world had forgotten? The question hung in the air before anyone could answer, because on that rainy afternoon, a single umbrella revealed more about a person's heart than 1,000 words ever could. The city of Brookhaven moved quickly beneath a sky painted in shades of gray. Car horns echoed between tall buildings, tires whispered across wet streets, and strangers hurried along with their heads lowered, protecting themselves from the cold rain falling harder by the minute. Nobody noticed the woman standing near the corner of Maple Avenue. Nobody except a little girl in a white coat. Her name was Olivia Bennett. She was 9 years old, the daughter of one of America's most successful businessmen, a child who lived in a world of private schools, elegant homes, and endless opportunities. But in that moment, she didn't see wealth. She didn't see appearances. She saw someone who was cold. The woman stood quietly beside a broken bus stop sign, holding a small worn bag close to her chest. Her clothes were simple, her shoes were soaked, and her eyes carried the tired look of someone who had spent too long feeling invisible. People walked past her. Some looked away. Some pretended not to notice. Then Olivia stepped out from beneath the protection of her family's luxury SUV. "Daddy, wait here," she said softly. Her father, William Bennett, looked surprised. "Olivia, where are you going?" The little girl didn't answer immediately. She simply walked through the rain, carrying the large blue umbrella that was almost too heavy for her small hands. The driver opened his mouth to call her back, but William lifted his hand. Something about his daughter's expression made him pause. The rain fell harder. The city became quieter. And then Olivia stood beside the woman and lifted the umbrella above both of them. "You look cold," Olivia whispered. "You can share mine." The woman looked down at her, confused. "Sweetheart, you don't even know me." Olivia smiled gently. "I know you're standing in the rain." 3 simple words. 3 simple truths. And somehow, they carried more kindness than all the expensive gifts Olivia had ever received. Across the street, inside an old silver pickup truck, Ethan Walker watched everything unfold. His hands rested on the steering wheel, but he wasn't driving. He had stopped without realizing it. Ethan was 39 years old, a single father who spent his days repairing engines at a small auto shop outside town. His truck had faded paint, his work boots had seen better years, and his bank account rarely gave him reasons to smile. But Ethan had something money could never buy. He noticed people. He noticed the quiet struggles others ignored. He noticed the moments when someone needed a little grace. For 5 years, since losing his wife, Ethan had focused on one promise: raising his daughter, Lily, to believe that kindness still mattered in a world that often forgot. He had told her many times, "We may not have everything, but we can always choose to give something." Now, watching a billionaire's daughter share an umbrella with a woman who had nothing, Ethan felt those words return to him. The windshield wipers moved slowly. The rain tapped against the glass like a gentle reminder. He looked at Olivia. He looked at the woman beside her. Then he looked at his own reflection in the window. A man who thought miracles belonged to other people. A man who believed his hardest days were already written. He didn't know who Olivia was. He didn't know who the woman was. He didn't know that this tiny moment in the rain was about to connect 3 lives forever. He only knew one thing: some moments are too important to simply drive past. So Ethan Walker opened his door, stepped into the rain, and walked toward them. And no one there understood, yet that the man who stopped the car would soon become the person who changed everything. Sometimes the people who need a miracle the most are the ones who are too proud to ask for one. Ethan Walker had learned that lesson long before the rainy afternoon on Maple Avenue. He had learned it in quiet kitchens, in empty parking lots, and in the small moments when life tested whether a person would choose kindness even when nobody was watching. As he stepped out of his old silver pickup truck, the rain soaked through his worn jacket within seconds. He did not care. His eyes remained fixed on the little girl holding the blue umbrella beside the stranger. There was something different about that moment. Something honest. Something rare. "Are you okay?" Ethan asked as he approached. The woman looked up, surprised by another person stopping for her. "I am fine," she answered softly, even though her voice carried the exhaustion of someone who had been carrying too much for too long. Ethan glanced at the small bag in her hands, and then at the rainwater running down the sidewalk. Being fine and being okay are not always the same thing. The woman looked away. For a second, she seemed unsure how to respond. Nobody had spoken to her that way in a long time. Not with pity, not with judgment, just simple respect. Olivia watched Ethan carefully. She had seen many people speak to adults with confidence, but there was something different about this man. He did not treat the woman like a problem to solve. He treated her like a person who mattered. "My name is Ethan," he said. "Do you have somewhere warm to go?" The woman hesitated. "I will figure something out." Ethan gave a small nod. He understood that answer. He had used those same words himself more times than he wanted to admit. 5 years earlier, Ethan Walker had been a different man. He had plans. He had dreams. He had a family that filled his home with laughter. Then life changed in ways he never expected. After losing his wife, every responsibility became heavier. Bills became harder to manage. Days became longer. Nights became quieter. But through all of it, Ethan made one promise. His daughter Lily would grow up knowing that kindness was never a weakness. It was a choice. Every morning before school, he reminded her of the same words. "The world will tell you to look away. Do not let it teach you that." Now, standing in the rain, Ethan realized his own lesson had come back to him through a child he had never met. Olivia smiled at the woman. "You can keep the umbrella for a little while." The woman shook her head quickly. "No, sweetheart. You need it." Olivia looked at Ethan, then back at the woman. "My dad always says, we have more than we need." From inside the luxury SUV, William Bennett watched silently through the window. He was a man who had built an empire through discipline, intelligence, and determination. But even he knew there were things money could never create. Compassion, humility, a genuine heart. Ethan opened the passenger door of his truck. "I have an extra blanket in the back. At least let us help you get somewhere dry." The woman looked at him carefully. "Why are you doing this?" Ethan paused. The rain continued falling around them, covering the city in a quiet silver mist. "Because someone once helped me when I needed it," he said. "And I never forgot." The woman lowered her eyes, holding back emotions she did not want strangers to see. Olivia stood beside Ethan, still holding the umbrella between them all. 3 people from completely different worlds, connected by a simple act of kindness. None of them knew it yet, but this rainy afternoon was not just a moment of compassion. It was the beginning of a story that would reveal hidden pain, unexpected connections, and a second chance that nobody saw coming. A person's true character is revealed not by what they have, but by what they are willing to give when nobody is watching. Ethan Walker had carried that belief for years, but that afternoon, watching a little girl named Olivia Bennett prove it without hesitation, reminded him that kindness could still exist in the busiest corners of the world. Inside Ethan's old pickup truck, the heater struggled against the cold rain as he drove slowly through the streets of Brookhaven. Beside him sat the woman he had just helped, her hands wrapped around a warm cup of coffee he had bought from a small corner shop nearby. Olivia sat in the back seat, carefully holding the blue umbrella that had started everything. The woman looked out the window quietly. Her name was Grace Miller. She was not used to receiving help. She was used to finding solutions alone, staying strong when things became difficult, and pretending she was not tired. "You did not have to stop," Grace finally said. Ethan kept his eyes on the road. "Maybe I did not have to, but I wanted to." Grace looked at him through the mirror. Those words seemed simple, but they carried something deeper. In a world where people often measured worth by success, appearance, and money, Ethan had offered something much rarer: respect. Olivia leaned forward slightly. "My dad says helping people is what we are supposed to do." Ethan smiled. "Your dad sounds like a good man." For a moment, Olivia looked down at the umbrella in her hands. She did not mention that her father was William Bennett, the billionaire behind Bennett Global, one of the largest investment companies in the country. She did not mention the private schools, the large home overlooking the city, or the endless meetings that filled her father's schedule. To Ethan, she was simply a child who noticed someone in need. That was all that mattered. Across town, William Bennett sat inside his office high above the streets of Brookhaven. The rain covered the windows like a thin curtain, turning the city lights into soft, golden reflections. His assistant had already shown him the security footage from outside the Bennett family vehicle. He had watched Olivia leave the car. He had watched her walk through the rain. He had watched a stranger join her. But what surprised him was not the umbrella. It was the man who stopped. "Find out who he is," William said quietly. His assistant looked at the screen. "The man with the truck?" William nodded. "Yes." There was no suspicion in his voice, Only curiosity. Because William had spent his entire life surrounded by people who wanted something from him. People who smiled because of his company. People who offered kindness because they knew his name. But Ethan Walker had no idea who Olivia was. He had no reason to impress anyone. He simply saw someone who needed help. Meanwhile, Ethan pulled his truck into a small apartment complex where Grace said she was staying temporarily. The building was old but clean, with warm lights glowing behind several windows. Before Grace stepped out, she turned back toward Ethan. "Thank you. Not just for today." Ethan looked confused. "What do you mean?" Grace held the umbrella gently. "Sometimes people do not need someone to fix their whole life. Sometimes they just need someone to remind them they are still seen." Ethan stayed silent for a moment. Those words reached a place inside him he rarely allowed anyone to touch. He thought about his late wife. He thought about Lily waiting at home. He thought about all the nights when he wondered if he was doing enough as a father. Then Olivia spoke softly from the back seat. "You are a good person, Ethan." He smiled. "Thank you, Olivia." But as Grace walked toward the building, she looked back one more time. There was a sadness in her eyes, but also a small spark of hope, because she knew something Ethan did not. The simple kindness he had shown that day would soon reconnect him with a forgotten chapter of her past. And when the truth finally came out, the man who thought he had nothing left to give would discover that his quiet compassion had already changed everything. Some people spend their whole lives trying to prove they are important, while others quietly show their worth through the smallest acts of kindness. After the rain disappeared from the streets of Brookhaven, the memory of that afternoon remained with the people who witnessed it. For Ethan Walker, it was simply another moment where he chose to do the right thing. He did not expect anything in return. He did not expect recognition. He did not even expect anyone to remember. The next morning, Ethan returned to his small auto repair shop on the edge of town. The familiar sounds surrounded him. The hum of engines. The smell of motor oil. The quiet rhythm of a man who had built a life around fixing things. But some things could not be repaired with tools. Some things required patience. Some things required hope. Ethan wiped his hands with an old cloth as he looked at the picture of his daughter Lily sitting on his workbench. She was smiling in the photo, holding a drawing she had made for him years ago. A simple picture of their family. A picture that reminded him why he kept going every day. "Another long day?" his co-worker Marcus asked as he walked into the garage. Ethan smiled slightly. "Probably." Marcus noticed Ethan seemed distracted. "You look like someone who saw something unusual." Ethan thought about Olivia and Grace. He thought about the umbrella. "Maybe I did," he answered. "But I do not think people realize how powerful a small kindness can be." Across the city, Olivia Bennett sat at the large dining table inside her family's home. The room was beautiful, with polished wood floors, elegant decorations, and more space than most families could imagine. But Olivia was not thinking about the luxury around her. She was thinking about Ethan. She was thinking about Grace. "Dad," she said quietly. William Bennett looked up from his morning coffee. "Yes, sweetheart." Why did everyone ignore her? William paused. He knew exactly who Olivia meant. The woman in the ring. The stranger nobody wanted to notice. "Sometimes people become so focused on their own problems that they forget to see others," he replied. Olivia looked down. "But that does not seem right." William studied his daughter. She had grown up surrounded by comfort, but she still carried something money could not create. A compassionate heart. "No," he said softly. "It does not." Later that day, William asked his assistant to continue looking into Ethan Walker. What started as simple curiosity became something deeper when the information arrived. Ethan was not just a mechanic. He was a single father who had spent years working hard, raising Lily, and helping people around him whenever he could. There were no headlines about him. No awards. No public attention. Just a quiet life filled with small choices that showed his character. William stared at the report for several minutes. He had met many successful people throughout his career. People with impressive titles and expensive lifestyles. But Ethan reminded him of something he had almost forgotten. True success was not always measured by what someone owned. Sometimes it was measured by what someone gave. Meanwhile, Grace Miller sat alone in her small apartment, holding the blue umbrella Olivia had shared with her. The room was quiet. The walls carried memories of a life that had changed completely. She opened an old box from the back of a closet. Inside were photographs, letters, and reminders of a chapter she had left behind. For years, Grace had believed that part of her life was over forever. But seeing Ethan's kindness and Olivia's innocence had awakened something she thought she had lost. Faith. Grace looked at a photograph from many years earlier and whispered, "Maybe it is time." She knew Ethan had no idea who she really was. He did not know the choices she had made. He did not know the people connected to her past. He only knew a woman standing in the rain who needed help. And that was exactly why his kindness meant so much. Because Ethan Walker had offered grace without knowing her name. He had offered respect without knowing her story. And soon, the truth hidden beneath Grace Miller's quiet life would reveal a connection none of them expected. A connection that would bring old wounds, new opportunities, and a second chance waiting just beyond the horizon. Sometimes the greatest tests in life are not about what we do when people are watching. They are about who we become when nobody knows our name. Ethan Walker never imagined that a simple stop in the rain would open a door to a world he had never been part of. To him, that afternoon was only about helping someone who needed a little kindness. But while Ethan continued his ordinary life at the repair shop, a quiet investigation was revealing something extraordinary about the man behind the old pickup truck. William Bennett sat in his office overlooking downtown Brookhaven, surrounded by glass walls and the sound of the busy city below. For most people, the view represented success. It represented power, achievement, and a lifetime of hard work. But William was not looking at the city. He was looking at a photograph on his tablet. It showed Ethan standing in the rain beside Olivia and Grace, holding the door of his truck open while offering help without hesitation. He did not know who she was? William asked. His assistant shook his head. No, sir. Ethan Walker had no idea Olivia was your daughter. William looked back at the image. That detail mattered more than anything else. Because kindness was easy when there was something to gain. The real question was whether someone would still choose kindness when there was nothing waiting. In return, tell me about him, William said. The report appeared on the screen. Ethan Walker, 39 years old, local mechanic, single father, resident of Brookhaven for nearly a decade. No public recognition, no business connections, no history of seeking attention. Just a man who showed up every day and quietly took care of the people around him. William read through the details carefully. Ethan had repaired vehicles for elderly neighbors who could not afford full prices. He had helped stranded drivers on the side of the road. He had even spent weekends teaching young people basic car maintenance so they could avoid expensive repairs. None of it had been announced. None of it had been shared online. Ethan simply did what he believed was right. William leaned back in his chair. People spend millions trying to build a reputation like that, he said quietly. And he built one without trying. Meanwhile, Ethan had no idea anyone was looking into his life. He was too busy preparing dinner for Lily after another long day at the shop. The small apartment was filled with the comforting smell of homemade food and the sound of his daughter talking about school. Dad, do you think people can tell when someone is good? Lily asked while sitting at the kitchen table. Ethan smiled. I think people can feel it. She thought for a moment. Like Olivia helping that woman. Ethan nodded. Exactly. Lily looked curious. Do you think she was rich? Ethan laughed softly. Maybe. But that was not what made her special. He placed a plate in front of his daughter. What made her special was that she saw someone who needed help and decided to care. Those words stayed with Lily. They also stayed with Ethan. Because he knew something important. Money could create comfort. Education could create opportunities. Success could create influence. But kindness created connection. Later that evening, Grace Miller opened the old box she had hidden away for years. The papers inside told a story Ethan and Olivia did not know. A story about a woman who had once stood beside some of the most influential people in the country. A woman who had lost everything important to her and walked away from a life she no longer recognized. She touched one of the documents and closed her eyes. Maybe people can change, she whispered. Maybe second chances are real. Outside, the rain had finally stopped. The streets were dry. The clouds were moving away. But the small act that happened beneath that blue umbrella continued creating ripples nobody could see. Ethan thought he had simply helped a stranger. Olivia thought she had simply shared an umbrella. William thought he was only learning about a kind man. But life had a way of bringing people together for reasons they did not understand at first. And soon, the truth about Grace Miller would change the way all of them saw the meaning of kindness, sacrifice, and a second chance. The truth about a person is not found in the things they own. It is found in the things they are willing to sacrifice when nobody will ever know. For years, Grace Miller had lived with a secret that shaped every decision she made. She had learned how to disappear. She learned how to walk through crowded streets without being noticed, how to keep her story hidden, and how to accept a simpler life without explaining what she had lost. But after meeting Ethan Walker and seeing the kindness of a little girl named Olivia Bennett, something inside her began to change. The next morning, Grace sat near the window of her small apartment, watching the people below walk through the streets of Brookhaven. The blue umbrella rested beside her chair. It was only a simple umbrella, but to Grace, it represented something much bigger. It reminded her that someone had seen her when the world looked away. She opened the old box she had kept hidden for years. Inside were photographs, letters, and documents from another chapter of her life. A life filled with meetings, important decisions, and people who once knew her name. Grace Miller had not always been the woman standing alone in the rain. Years earlier, she had been one of the most respected names in the world of charitable foundations. She had created programs that helped families rebuild their lives after difficult seasons. She had worked alongside leaders, investors, and community organizations across the country. But success had brought complications. Trust had been broken. Relationships had changed. And after a painful disagreement with people she once considered close, Grace chose to step away from everything. She did not want attention. She did not want sympathy. She only wanted peace. But peace became loneliness, and loneliness became a life where she stopped believing anyone would care without knowing her past. Until Ethan stopped his car. Until Olivia shared her umbrella. Across town, Ethan was preparing for another normal day at the repair shop. He had no idea the woman he helped carried a history connected to some of the most influential people in the country. To him, Grace was simply Grace. A person who needed warmth. A person who deserved respect. That was exactly what made his kindness different. He had not helped because of her achievements. He had helped because of her humanity. Meanwhile, William Bennett continued learning more about Ethan and Grace. The information about Grace surprised him more than he expected. When he saw her name in the report, he became quiet. "Grace Miller," he said softly. His assistant nodded. "Yes, Mr. Bennett. We believe it is the same Grace Miller who founded the Hope Horizon Foundation years ago." William looked out the window. He remembered that name. Many people had forgotten Grace's contributions, but he had not. She was someone who once inspired others to believe that success meant using what you had to help people who needed it most. Why would she be living like this? William asked. His assistant lowered the report. "We are still trying to understand that." William looked back at the photograph of Olivia holding the umbrella. Suddenly, the pieces felt connected. A little girl with a generous heart. A struggling father with quiet dignity. A woman who had lost her place in the world but never lost her compassion. 3 lives had crossed paths on an ordinary rainy day. Yet nothing about that moment felt ordinary anymore. That evening, Ethan sat with Lily at their kitchen table. His daughter was drawing a picture of the blue umbrella from memory. "I think umbrellas are special," Lily said. Ethan smiled. "Why is that?" She looked at her drawing. "Because they do not stop the rain. They just remind people they are not standing in it alone." Ethan became quiet. Those words stayed with him. Because sometimes children understood what adults forgot. Sometimes the smallest acts carried the deepest meaning. And somewhere across Brookhaven, Grace Miller looked at her old memories one more time and made a decision. She knew it was time to stop hiding. It was time to tell the truth. Not because she wanted her old life back. Not because she wanted recognition. But because Ethan and Olivia had reminded her of something she thought she had lost forever. Hope. And when the truth finally came out, the world would learn that the woman they thought needed saving was actually someone who had spent her entire life saving others. There are moments when the world finally discovers what a person was worth all along. Not because they became someone new, but because people finally opened their eyes. For Ethan Walker, that moment arrived on a quiet Friday morning when an unfamiliar black sedan stopped outside his small repair shop. He was standing near an old pickup truck, tightening a loose bolt, when he noticed the vehicle. It was the kind of car that did not usually appear in his neighborhood. Clean, elegant, completely out of place among the older vehicles waiting for repairs. Ethan wiped his hands and watched as William Bennett stepped out. He recognized the name immediately. Almost everyone in Brookhaven knew it. William Bennett was not just a successful businessman. He was a symbol of achievement, a person whose decisions affected thousands of lives. But Ethan did not expect what happened next. William walked toward him and extended his hand. "Mr. Walker," he said, "I am William Bennett." Ethan shook his hand carefully. "I know who you are." William looked around the small garage. "Then you probably know I have a reason for being here." Ethan nodded. "I assume this is not about getting your car repaired." A small smile appeared on William's face. "No, it is not." The two men stood in silence for a moment. The sounds of the repair shop continued around them. Tools moving, engines running, ordinary work happening in an ordinary place. Yet something about the moment felt different. William looked at Ethan with a quiet respect. "I wanted to thank you." Ethan seemed confused. "For what?" "For doing something most people would have ignored." Ethan understood immediately. The rain, the umbrella, Grace, Olivia. He looked down for a moment. "I only helped someone who needed help." William nodded. "That is exactly why I came." Those words carried weight. Because William had spent decades meeting people who wanted opportunities, connections, and advantages. But Ethan had offered kindness without knowing anyone's name, without knowing anyone's status, without expecting anything in return. William reached into his coat and removed a small envelope. Ethan looked at it, but did not take it. "What is that?" he asked. "Something to thank you for what you did." Ethan slowly shook his head. "I appreciate the thought, but I did not help her for a reward." William studied him carefully. This was the answer he expected, but hearing it still surprised him. "You really do not want anything?" Ethan smiled softly. "Everyone wants something. I want my daughter to grow up in a world where people still care about each other. That is enough." For a few seconds, William said nothing. He looked away, almost as if those words reached somewhere deeper than he expected. Later that afternoon, William invited Ethan and Lily to the Bennett family home. Ethan almost refused. The idea of entering that world felt uncomfortable. But Olivia had asked personally. She wanted to see Lily and show her the garden where she spent many quiet afternoons. When Ethan arrived, he noticed something unexpected. Despite the size of the house, Olivia was still just a child looking for friendship. She showed Lily her favorite books, her drawings, and the small places where she liked to sit and think. Meanwhile, Grace arrived later that evening. The moment William saw her, the room became quiet. Years of memories returned in a single glance. "Grace," William said softly. She smiled. "It has been a long time." Ethan looked between them, realizing there was a story he did not know. A story much bigger than the rainy afternoon that brought them together. Grace looked at Ethan and said, "You helped me when you had no idea who I was." Ethan answered, "That should not matter." Grace nodded. "Exactly. That is what makes it matter." The room fell silent. Not an uncomfortable silence. A meaningful one. The kind of silence where people finally understand something important. Ethan had never considered himself extraordinary. He was just a father trying to do his best. But William, Olivia, and Grace saw something he could not see in himself. They saw dignity. They saw kindness. They saw a person who proved that the greatest value in life is not what someone owns. It is what someone gives when nobody is watching. The greatest rewards in life are not always the ones that change our circumstances. Sometimes, they are the ones that remind us we were never invisible. After the evening at the Bennett home, Ethan Walker returned to his small apartment with a heart that felt lighter than it had in years. He had entered a world of wealth and influence, but he did not leave feeling smaller. Instead, he left with something he had not expected: respect. For most of his life, Ethan had believed that people like William Bennett lived in a completely different world. A world of private meetings, expensive homes, and opportunities that seemed impossible for ordinary people. But that night showed him something different. Behind every success story was a person. Behind every fortune was a journey. And sometimes, the richest people were the ones who still had something to learn. The following week, William invited Ethan to his office. Ethan arrived wearing his best button-down shirt, the same one he saved for important occasions. He felt nervous walking through the tall glass building in downtown Brookhaven. Employees moved quickly through the lobby, carrying documents and preparing for meetings. Everything looked polished and organized. But Ethan reminded himself of something. He was not there because he was trying to become someone else. He was there because he had stayed true to who he already was. William greeted him warmly. "I appreciate you coming." Ethan smiled. "I am still not sure why you wanted me here." William walked toward the window overlooking the city. Because I have spent years building companies, but I realized something recently. Success means very little if it does not create something good for others. Ethan listened quietly. William continued, I want to create a program that helps single parents learn skills, find better work opportunities, and build a more stable future for their children. Ethan looked surprised. And what does that have to do with me? William turned around. Everything. Ethan shook his head. I am just a mechanic. William smiled. No. You are someone who understands people. Those words stayed with Ethan. Because for years, he had measured himself by what he could not provide. He worried about the things he could not buy for Lily, the opportunities he could not always afford. The life he feared was not enough. But William saw something different. He saw a father who gave his daughter values money could not purchase. Meanwhile, Grace Miller began rebuilding her life in a way she never expected. She accepted an invitation to return to community work, but this time, she did it differently. She no longer cared about recognition. She cared about impact. She worked quietly, helping families who felt forgotten, just as Ethan had helped her. Olivia often visited the program with her father. She enjoyed spending time with Lily, and the two girls quickly became close friends. They came from completely different backgrounds, but they shared something important. They both believed kindness mattered. One afternoon, Olivia handed Ethan a small package. Inside was a framed picture. It showed the blue umbrella from that rainy day, painted by Lily and Olivia together. Underneath the picture were simple words. A small kindness can create a big change. Ethan looked at it for a long moment. He thought about the day he stopped his truck. He thought about how close he had come to simply driving past. Life was full of moments that seemed ordinary until years later, when people realized they had changed everything. William watched Ethan holding the picture and smiled. He knew money could open doors. It could build companies and create opportunities. But it could never replace character. Ethan had walked into their lives as a stranger. He became a friend because of one simple choice. He chose to care. And that choice created a chain of kindness that reached far beyond one rainy afternoon. Because sometimes, a person does not need to be famous to make a difference. Sometimes, all it takes is a good heart, a moment of courage, and the willingness to stop when everyone else keeps moving. Years from now, people would remember the success, the opportunities, and the changes that followed. But the people who lived through that rainy afternoon would remember something much simpler. They would remember a choice to care when it would have been easier to look away. Time moved forward in Brookhaven, but the lesson from that day never disappeared. The blue umbrella that once stood in the middle of a rainy street became a quiet reminder that small acts of kindness could create waves far beyond what anyone expected. Ethan Walker continued working at his repair shop, but his life had changed in ways he never imagined. The garage was still the same. The old tools still hung on the walls. The same familiar sounds filled the air every morning. But Ethan no longer saw himself as a man simply trying to survive. He finally understood that his value was never measured by the size of his bank account or the things he could provide. It was measured by the love he gave and the lives he touched. Lily noticed the change too. Her father seemed lighter. He smiled more often. He talked about the future instead of only worrying about the present. One evening, while they sat together outside their apartment building, Lily looked at the sunset and asked, "Dad, do you think one person can really change the world?" Ethan smiled. He looked at his daughter, the same child he had worked so hard to raise with kindness and courage. "I think one person can change another person's world," he answered. And sometimes that is where everything begins. Across town, William Bennett stood inside his office holding the framed picture of the blue umbrella. It was not the most expensive thing in his collection. It was not made by a famous artist. But it was the one thing he valued most. Because it represented a truth he had almost forgotten. Real wealth was not about having more. Real wealth was about giving more. Grace Miller continued helping others through the new community program. People who once felt forgotten found support. Parents who struggled to create better futures found opportunities. Families who felt invisible finally felt seen. And every time someone asked Grace why she dedicated herself to helping others, she always gave the same answer. Because someone once reminded me that I mattered. Olivia grew older, but she never forgot the woman under the umbrella. She never forgot Ethan stepping out of his truck in the rain. She never forgot that kindness did not require a title, a fortune, or a reason. It only required a willing heart. Years later, Olivia returned to the same street where everything began. The old bus stop had been replaced, the buildings had changed, and the city looked different. But she still remembered that moment clearly. A moment when a little girl offered shelter, a stranger offered compassion, and a father discovered that even the smallest action could create a lifetime of change. Ethan eventually told Lily that life would always bring difficult days. There would be moments when people judged others too quickly, moments when kindness seemed unnoticed, moments when doing the right thing felt like the harder choice. But he also told her something else. Goodness is never wasted. Because somewhere, someone always remembers. Someone always carries it forward. And that was the true miracle of the blue umbrella. It did not stop the rain. It did something much greater. It reminded people that they were not alone. In the end, the greatest transformations did not come from wealth, power, or recognition. They came from quiet dignity, from grace, from second chances, from ordinary people who chose to do something extraordinary in a simple moment. And sometimes, all it takes to change everything is one person who decides to stop, step forward, and care.